A woman
Welcome home.
disappears from her own
I think you'll
home,
be very
and
happy
everyone
here.
believes she has been
Absolutely
replaced.
perfect.
Julian
Do
moves
you
on
think
with
she saw
Serena,
us?
thinking the past is gone and the truth will never return. But far away, Eleanor is not defeated. She is silent, watching, waiting for the right moment. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one preparing the most powerful comeback. And when the truth finally rises, everything changes. Value and lesson. Never underestimate someone who stays silent. They might be preparing the strongest return of their life. If you enjoyed this story, please give the video one like and
I have
one
some
share
difficult
to
news.
support the channel and motivate us to create
Your
more
mother has
powerful
left.
stories like this. Thanks for watching.
The night Julian Vance introduced his new star, CEO, at a tech gala in their Pacific Heights townhouse, he gathered his 3 children in his home office, looked at their questioning faces, and said, "Your mother has to remain in Kyoto to finalize some family matters." His wife, Eleanor, 7 months pregnant, was an ocean away in a quiet Japanese clinic, holding her father's hand as his life slipped away. She had no idea the admin credentials to their secure home server had just been cloned for a guest. She had no clue another woman was sipping whiskey from her grandfather's crystal tumblers, and she had absolutely no idea that in less than 72 hours she would become one of the most powerful and invisible forces in Silicon Valley. What Julian didn't know, what no one in that sleek, minimalist house knew, was that Eleanor's father was Silas Hayes. The Silas Hayes, the legendary coder whose foundational patents were the secret backbone of modern encryption, with a $60 billion portfolio of intellectual property, private equity, and digital trusts. And every last patent, every line of code, every dollar of that tech empire had just been passed down to one person, his daughter. The same woman Julian had just given guest-level access to her own inheritance. The same woman whose meticulously organized family archives were now scheduled for a complete system wipe. The same woman whose 12-year-old son was in his room quietly running a network analysis on a party photo his dad had just posted, tracing the metadata of the new woman's smart watch to a private server address before his father could delete the post. But this is where the story you think you know veers off-road. Eleanor didn't yell. She didn't plead. She didn't send a single frantic email. She mourned her father. She studied his private code repositories. She spoke with the fiduciaries of his digital estate. And then, from a hardened laptop in her hotel room, she hijacked the main presentation at the Global Tech Summit, an event Julian's venture capital firm was sponsoring, and watched his face lose all its color, turning to a sickly shade of dread as he finally realized whose name was now listed as the sole proprietor of the Hayes Foundation. What she did after that is something his professional legacy will never survive. This story is going to show you 3 moments where Eleanor was nearly shattered. 2 moments where she believed she had everything back under control, only to have it ripped away, and 1 final silent command that will make you want to stand up and cheer. Stick around. Every single detail is critical. This entire account is built on one truth. Silence is not submission. Patience is not passivity. And the person with the real power in the room is almost never the one making the most noise. It's the one who understands the true leverage of their assets and waits for the perfect moment to make a single, decisive play. If you have ever been written out of your own success story, been underestimated, or had your life's work claimed by someone who was supposed to be your biggest champion, then this story is for you. If any of this is hitting home for you, do me a quick favor. Click that subscribe button so you don't miss a single part of this saga. Leave a comment and tell me, when did you know Julian's life was a house of cards? Was it giving another woman server access? the plan to erase Eleanor's history, or that public execution at the summit. I read every single comment, and your theories are always fascinating. Share this with a friend who needs to hear it. And if you stay with me to the very end, you will learn why the most ruthless move is the one executed without a single spoken word. I'll see you in the next chapter. The night Julian Vance brought his mistress home, he stood before his children and informed them their mother was, for all intents and purposes, gone. He had come to believe his own press release. He'd practiced the words in the reflection of his server rack for days, modulating his voice, working on an expression of weary regret, creating the perfect image of a man pretending to be devastated while privately feeling the electric thrill of a fresh start. By the time he gave that performance in the office Eleanor had spent over a decade perfecting, the lie had become so embedded in his mind, it felt like an irrefutable data point. But thousands of miles away, in a secure data haven, buried beneath a granite mountain in Norway, a team of 4 cybersecurity auditors and patent attorneys in quiet suits were logging into a decentralized network. They used biometric keys. They spoke in clipped, technical language. And they held the digital and legal instruments that would systematically liquidate Julian Vance's entire world before he even had a chance to open a second bottle of champagne. But this story doesn't begin in that data fortress. It doesn't begin with digital trusts or encrypted asset transfers. It starts 12 years earlier, with a woman who learned to hide her own genius from a man who was deeply threatened by it. If you think you've heard this story before, trust me, you haven't heard this version. The townhouse overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge was Eleanor's masterpiece. From the specific hue of the low-glare paint designed for coding marathons to the last custom-milled hardware on the server room door, she had architected every system: polished concrete floors, smart lighting rigs, a Spartan kitchen with a single island of quartz she had personally selected from a quarry in Brazil, while Julian was at a crypto conference in Miami. She acquired the rare first edition computer science manuals for their library from an MIT professor's estate sale, flew to Boston twice to supervise their transport with her son Liam, and installed them herself before Julian got home and asked if she had finally gotten rid of those obsolete manuals. She never expected him to get it. She finished cataloging their serial numbers after he went to sleep. The children's digital art was displayed on a rotating gallery screen in the hall, not just saved to the cloud, but professionally archived with version control. Because Eleanor knew that when you treat a child's creativity with respect, you teach them that their own ideas have inherent worth. And kids never forget that. Liam, at 8, had coded a working tic-tac-toe game. Olivia, at 6, had designed a whole cast of animated characters with backstories so rich they felt alive. Little Noah, age 3, had made a series of chaotic swipes on a tablet that he insisted was a circuit diagram for a robot dog. Eleanor had saved every single file on a triple redundant private server, complete with commit history and a short audio file of each child describing their project. Pinned on the kitchen's smart screen with a digital icon of an oak tree was the feeding schedule for the sourdough starter she had been cultivating for 5 years. Her cybersecurity journal was on her bedside table, open to page 312, an analysis of zero-day exploits she hadn't gotten to finish. Her running shoes were by the door, placed perfectly parallel, a tiny ritual she performed every morning. And on the wall in her small home office, in a simple frame that was always there, was a quote printed on archival paper. "The interface is not the engine." Her father had typed that on a command line for her after she found a backdoor in a government database when she was only 10, sitting in his chaotic Silicon Valley garage, surrounded by the scent of old circuit boards and strong coffee. The point was that a flashy exterior was for marketing. Real power was in the robust, unseen architecture that gave a system its true integrity. She had built her entire life on that idea, like an invisible operating system. The apartment smelled of her, of green tea and the clean, cool air of the server room, and something so calming that visitors could never quite put their finger on it. It smelled like a home that had been meticulously engineered and deeply loved by a mind that saw the elegance in every detail. And none of it, not the peace, not the 12 years of a woman building a home and raising a family from nothing. None of it was any protection against what was coming. Here's something you should probably remember. The first sign of a total system collapse is never the massive outage. It's the tiny warning flag you ignore. The second laptop he has for work trips. The text notifications he dismisses the second you walk into the room. The kiss that used to be a genuine connection and is now just a scripted action. Always pay attention to the little anomalies. They are the warning signs for a life that is about to be completely rewritten. Eleanor had 3 children. Liam was 12, quiet and analytical, with his mother's gift for seeing the deep logic in things that left other people mystified. He read technical manuals and books about network security. He noticed everything, saw every dependency, and only spoke up when he had isolated the single line of code that changed the whole program. Eleanor called him her little architect, and it was the highest form of praise she knew because she had been one herself. Olivia was 9, a dreamer, an artist who was sensitive to emotional wavelengths that most people don't even know are there. She was constantly creating worlds on her tablet, drawing characters for fantastical stories. She would go completely silent and retreat to her room when her parents' voices got tense, even if they were whispering, because Olivia could feel the emotional atmosphere in a house degrade like a slow internet connection. And little Noah was 4 years old, a hurricane of joyful, curious energy that Eleanor found both exhausting and profoundly wonderful. He liked to disassemble things into their component parts. Model. Leah once pointed at her father's lead coder and announced, "Hello, architect," in front of 2 of their family friends, and Clara had to gently explain that no, the brilliant woman who designed the new security protocols was not her grandmother. Julian just called anyone who built a new digital world for his company an architect. This had included the programmer who developed their AI assistant, and most memorably, a cyberneticist they saw in a documentary. She adored her mother with the fierce, uncomplicated devotion of a young girl who didn't yet know that loyalty could be a liability. Clara was 7 months pregnant. She moved through the gleaming stainless steel kitchen of her closed restaurant, one hand on her belly, whispering to the baby about the sharp tang of yuzu and the deep smoky aroma of paprika charring over an open flame. Leo noticed it first, lingering unseen in the doorway of her father's home office, hearing him on a video call with someone who wasn't a colleague. He said nothing. He just watched him with the sharp, assessing gravity of a 12-year-old, then spun on his heel and disappeared down the hall. Nina Thorne met Julian Croft at a global tech summit in Aspen on a bright, cold afternoon in February. Julian Croft had a unique kind of charisma. Some men are just born with it, a quiet intensity that recalibrates the energy in a boardroom the moment they walk in. He had a disarming smile and a way of listening that made you believe your half-formed startup idea was the most disruptive concept he had ever encountered. He was visionary, relentless, and radiated an ambition so potent it felt like a law of physics, and Nina was pulled into his field of influence before the first panel discussion had even begun. But when they were alone, away from the server racks and quarterly projections, a different man emerged. one with an unnerving perception. He would notice the slight hesitation in her voice when she discussed a competitor's valuation, a detail no one else caught. At their second dinner, he had a bottle of her favorite rare sake waiting, a label she'd only mentioned in passing during a podcast interview months ago. He understood her technical metaphors about data streams and neural networks that bored everyone else to tears, which is the most potent form of connection, the kind that makes you feel not just admired, but finally seen. She fell for the entire package, the way you fall when you're driven, assuming the person you meet is the final version of their product. What Nina didn't mention, what Julian had no idea about, was that her father was Marcus Thorne. If you followed venture capital in Silicon Valley for the last 30 years, you knew that name. One financial journal had dubbed him the Oracle of Sand Hill Road. He had built his family's legendary investment influence not on flashy IPOs, but on the quiet, early funding of companies that would later define entire industries, a legacy built over 3 decades of shrewd foresight and a refusal to chase hype that made him seem out of touch in the moment, but made him a legend in the long term. Marcus Thorne's personal net worth was a figure that felt like a rounding error to most billionaires. Yet, Nina's childhood was the opposite of lavish. Her mother had passed away when she was young. Her father raised her in a sprawling, modern house in Palo Alto, filled with circuit boards and prototypes, a world away from the mega yachts and private jets. She grew up surrounded by innovation, where the closest family friend was a retired software engineer who would bring her outdated microchips and call her Neens. Marcus Thorne believed that capital without vision was just expensive gambling. Kneeling in his workshop one afternoon, his hands deep in the wiring of a server he was building himself, he told Nina, "Money you don't risk yourself is a liability, kid, not an asset. It will either make you cautious or make you someone else's trophy. You have to learn to build your own circuit board first." Then, he continued, wiping grease from his forehead with the back of his hand, "You'll always know who values you for your strategy and who just wants a seat on your board." Nina took that lesson and coded it into her DNA, right next to her father's recipe for burnt-at-the-edges toast and the hum of the cooling fans in his server room. And she took it with her everywhere. She told Julian her father was in early-stage investments. She arranged one efficient lunch for them before their first major deal. Marcus Thorne sat across from Julian in a starkly minimalist cafe in Seattle for exactly 45 minutes, drank black coffee, asked 2 terrifyingly prescient questions about his burn rate, and was mostly quiet. He took a helicopter back to the airport that same afternoon. That night, as Nina was reviewing a term sheet, her father stood in the doorway of her hotel room and said, without warmth or judgment, just a cold, clear analysis, "He values the market share you're helping him conquer. Just make sure he also values the analyst you are when you're staring at a failing investment at 3 in the morning." Nina nodded, thinking she understood. It would be another year before she would truly grasp the vulnerability her father had spotted in that single meeting. Their first months were electric, a convergence of ambition. When your shared future is a beautiful market, you're capturing together, sector by profitable sector, in perfect alignment. Clara had built her Michelin-starred restaurant from a single, risky idea, one rave review at a time. She raised Leo, and then Miles. She made their Seattle waterfront home a bastion of warmth and taste. She was happy, or maybe more precisely, Julian was a titan and she was an artist. And she hadn't yet learned that those 2 things were governed by entirely different laws of success. The first hairline cracks showed up in year 7. Julian's company went public. He started spending weeks overseas, closing international deals. It just seemed like the cost of scaling up. In year 8, the subtle optimizations began. On her new seasonal menu, it's incredible, but maybe a touch complex for our brand synergy. On her parenting, you're letting Miles monopolize your bandwidth. In year 9, he stopped touching her when they went to sleep. If she moved toward him, he would murmur he was powering down. Always powering down. A fatigue that was less about a need for rest and more about a complete system reboot of his desires. Year 10. Clara learned she was pregnant with their third child. She told Julian over a rare scheduled dinner at home, her voice unsteady, with a fragile optimism she hadn't felt in years. His reaction was neither joy nor shock. It was a brief pause, a flurry of internal processing followed by, "Understood. We'll need to upgrade the au pair's security clearance for the nursery." It was the logistical response of a CEO planning a new product launch, not realizing a competitor was already inside his network. Nina Thorne was named the lead partner at a venture capital firm that Julian had been battling for a controlling stake in a key AI startup for 14 months before the Tuesday that shattered everything. She was 34, a deal-maker with a reputation for a ruthless, data-driven vision. She specialized in one thing: identifying powerful men who had started to see the brilliant women in their lives as stable assets rather than as partners in growth. She didn't try to seduce Julian. That was too inefficient. She audited his entire life's ambition. She asked him about the moonshot projects he'd abandoned and what kind of legacy he was actually coding for humanity. Questions Clara no longer asked because she thought they were building the code together, line by line. Nina made his life's work feel urgent and disruptive again. She would say things like, "Your wife is a true visionary with food. I hope she understands the kind of bloodbath you face in every funding round. And to operate at your scale must be an incredibly lonely computation." And then she deployed the single line of code that bypassed all his firewalls. "It seems a man with your vision needs an equal investor in that vision, not just a beneficiary of its dividends." And Julian, who had an extraordinary woman at home, running a celebrated restaurant, managing their family, and carrying their third child, processed those words and accepted them as data. Because the most compelling lie is always the one that confirms the algorithm you secretly run on yourself. And then there was Beatrice, Julian's mother. She had been waiting nearly a decade for a system vulnerability like this to emerge, and she exploited the opening with surgical precision. Beatrice had never truly approved of Clara, not for anything Clara did, but for what she represented. Clara was too organic. Her quiet confidence came from her own talent and hard work, not from a strategic alliance. She was too complete on her own. Beatrice had wanted a daughter-in-law from another tech dynasty, a merger she could leverage for her son's career. Clara had shown up with dirt under her fingernails and the scent of her kitchen, built on a foundation of tangible craft that was much older and more real than Beatrice's. And for that, she was never truly integrated into the family. She would inject her subtle malware during her weekly video calls with Julian. That Clara seemed so unfocused lately, that she was so lost in her little food projects, that Clara's real devotion was to a Michelin guide, not to the Croft dynasty. She said it with a tone of deep maternal concern. She said it repeatedly. She said it like a hacker who plants a single, elegant piece of spyware and then sits back to watch the entire network collapse. The night it all crashed was a Tuesday in March. Clara was at the massive steel prep table in her kitchen, testing a new component for a dessert. 7 months pregnant. Her feet ached. Her back had the persistent, low-level throb that defined the third trimester. Not painful enough to mention, but too present to ignore. The kids were down for the night. The sprawling house was finally still. Across the den, my husband Julian was on his laptop, finalizing logistics for an urgent investor summit in Aspen. I saw him toggle between screens just as my own phone, which I'd left on the coffee table, buzzed with an alert from our private bank. A charge had just cleared. The notification read, Carmel Atelier, final payment. But the link in the transaction notes wasn't for a watch or a piece of art. It was a private portal to view a design mock-up for a necklace, a diamond star chart of a constellation I didn't recognize, commissioned for someone named Anya. My hand paused on the arm of the sofa. I didn't move a muscle. The annual Tech Innovators Ball was a glitzy, tedious event I'd skipped, pleading pregnancy fatigue. I pulled up the event's public photo gallery, a picture of a senator, a venture capitalist. And there, just out of focus in the background, was my husband Julian. Beneath the sparkle of a crystal installation, his lips were gently touching the cheek of a woman who was definitely not me. This was from last Saturday. The same Saturday, he was supposedly at an all-hands tech conference in Austin. I slowly lowered the screen of my laptop. The soft, final snap of the device closing was the most deafening sound I had ever heard. I didn't look away from the dark reflection in the screen. I didn't even gasp. I walked down the long, gallery-white hallway to our bedroom suite, braced my hands on the cool quartz of the vanity, and stared at my own reflection in the mirror. 8 months pregnant, standing in the San Francisco glass house I had designed from the ground up, looking at a digital receipt that confirmed the man I'd built an empire with was busy forging a new future with a woman whose name I now knew. I drew a breath in for a count of 5, held it, and let it out for a count of 7. I had to anchor myself to something I could control, because the rest of my universe had just shattered into a million pieces. I repeated the cycle 5 more times. Then I ran cold water over the veins in my wrists, walked back to the living room, and started the routine of preparing his nightly tea. 180 milliliters of water, brought to exactly 92 degrees Celsius. I placed it on the coaster next to his favorite chair. When Julian glanced up from his tablet, saw the familiar ceramic mug, and muttered a distracted, "Thanks, babe," I just offered a small, tired smile. He took the mug, vanished into his home office, and the heavy, soundproofed door slid shut between us for the night. When you uncover a betrayal of that scale, your first impulse is to start a war, to scream, to shatter things, to force them to answer for what they've done right then and there. But this is the one thing nobody ever tells you. The moment you give in to that raw, unplanned fury, you surrender every ounce of your leverage. You hand them a script where they get to play the part of the penitent. You allow them to warp the narrative. They can produce tears or ignite in defensive rage, somehow twisting their infidelity into a problem that you caused. And then you're the one left standing alone in the wreckage of a life they demolished in secret. So, if you can find the strength, and it requires a truly Herculean effort, you wait. Not for long, just long enough to guarantee that your next move is a strategy, not just a reaction. For the next 2 weeks, I wrapped myself in a quiet that my husband Julian completely misunderstood. He chalked it up to the crushing exhaustion of the 3rd trimester. He saw it as one of my withdrawn moods, the kind that always resolved with either a few days of icy silence or a tearful apology from my end. He was certain I was breaking down. He had no idea I was building an arsenal. Julian never noticed how the very texture of my quiet had changed. I stopped asking about the new startups he was thinking of acquiring. I no longer rested my hand on his knee when we streamed old black and white movies. I started taking more hushed phone calls out on the cantilevered deck overlooking the bay. My voice a low, steady hum, speaking the unfamiliar language of asset liquidation and custodial trusts that was never intended for his ears. Julian saw me retreating into the final, intense push to finish my new cookbook and felt a wave of relief. That simple, selfish feeling of his own comfort was the last piece of proof I needed. When the person you've pledged your life to starts to pull away, you're supposed to feel a knot of fear in your stomach, not a sense of ease. Julian felt at ease, and that confirmed for me that our marriage was now just a beautiful, empty architectural shell. I was simply the last one to admit that the certificate of occupancy had long since expired. My flight to Tokyo was scheduled for a Tuesday. I was in the kitchen, packing lunches for my son, Leo's school week, with a quiet Bach cello suite filling the air. My keynote speech was set. This trip, under the patronage of my mentor, the legendary food critic Kenji Tanaka, was not a vacation. It was the formal launch of a venture that would redefine my entire career. Mr. Tanaka was an icon in the culinary world who had stepped away from the spotlight to a serene estate in Kyoto after selling his media empire. He had become my fiercest champion, my strategic partner, and I always faced a problem with cool, methodical planning. Every move was calculated. My entire focus narrowed to the next logical step. My suitcases were packed in under an hour. I emailed a detailed itinerary to the nannies for Leo and Maya. I had 5 nights of their favorite dinners portioned and labeled in the freezer. I sent Julian a text about our daughter's upcoming piano recital, a detail he'd already been reminded of twice, with the time and address pinned in our shared family calendar. Before the car service arrived, I found Julian in his study, admiring a new piece of server hardware, and calmly recited my flight number, hotel name, and return date. I reminded him one last time to make sure Maya had a ride to her recital. Julian gave me a quick, perfunctory kiss, said something condescending about my little recipe project, and was already dialing his phone before my car had even cleared the driveway. By the next morning, he had called his home security firm. Standing in a silk robe, he watched as all the locks were changed to a new biometric system, and he felt a deep, swelling sense of justification. He had a narrative, now, a story his sister Chloe had helped him construct. In his telling, I had chosen my own ambition over our family. He was merely protecting his home from a decision I had already made. This is what happens to a man who is gently persuaded by all the wrong people that he is the one who has been wronged. His version of the story becomes so polished and real that it feels more true than the truth itself. On Saturday morning, Chloe was the first to arrive. She swept into the minimalist house carrying a box of designer pastries and wearing an expression of practiced sympathy that had never once seemed genuine in the decade I had known her. She set the box on the marble island and began to survey the space as if she were taking inventory, adjusting the smart thermostat, tracing a finger along the custom cabinetry, and pausing at the entrance to my kitchen like a general inspecting conquered territory. Her new husband, Ben, shuffled in behind her, tense and silent, carrying suitcases from their new electric car. He nearly stumbled over a footstool, steadying himself against a bookshelf with a quiet apology. Ben wasn't a bad man. He was simply a man who had let his desire for an easy life curdle into a type of silence that was functionally the same as cowardice. And then, stepping out of the car in a sharp, tailored blazer and carrying a tablet, was Anya. She walked through the front door, down the hall, and straight into my home office. The soft musical chime of her phone connecting to the house's Sonos speaker system was a clear, piercing signal of occupation that I heard through a secure audio feed, thousands of miles away across the Pacific. Julian gathered the children in the media room, my media room, with its custom acoustic panels and shelves filled with classic films. He looked at our son and daughter with the placid expression of a man absolutely certain of his own moral high ground. "Your mother has made a decision," he told them. "She chose her career over us. She won't be coming back to this house, but I am here, and I will always, always be here for you." Chloe stood just over his shoulder, nodding her head with grave sincerity. Ben stared intently at his expensive sneakers. Maya, sensing the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere, had already scrambled onto her older brother's lap, making a tiny shield of herself against a threat she couldn't yet name. And Leo, who was 14, stood near the door. He looked at his father for a long, quiet moment. He didn't argue. He didn't cry. He just watched him with cool, discerning eyes and said nothing at all. Then he turned, walked to his room, and shut the door with the soft, decisive click of someone who had just permanently filed away a crucial piece of information about his father's character. In a serene suite in Tokyo, with a view of the sprawling, rain-slicked city and the delicate scent of green tea in the air, I monitored the live feed on a secured tablet. Mr. Tanaka sat in an armchair by the window, his face as unreadable and composed as the antique calligraphy scrolls in his home. His slow, even breathing was the only other sound in the room. He was a man who had navigated corporate betrayals and family power struggles, and he knew a hostile takeover when he saw one. On the polished black table between us sat a leather-bound portfolio. Embossed in silver leaf on the cover were the words, "Elena Reyes, founder." It held the articles of incorporation, the financial architecture that would establish me as the head of a new, independent, global restaurant group endowed by a private fund that Tanaka had organized. He had planned to give it to me after my keynote address. I hadn't opened it. Not yet. Instead, she spoke to him. She told him about Noah's latest coding project, a virtual reality walkthrough of the Acropolis. She told him about Sophie's fierce determination on the fencing strip, how she loved the strategy and discipline of the sport. She described the baby's habit of punching her bladder and swore she saw a flicker of a smile on Julian's face. She told him how the baby seemed to wake up every night around 2 a.m., as if it were already on a venture capitalist's transatlantic schedule. She mentioned she was leaning towards naming him Leo. She clung to these small, definite, reassuring details because she wasn't prepared for the sheer volume of data stored on that encrypted drive, and because some part of her could still feel the life that was being methodically overwritten. On the fourth morning, her lawyer, Mr. Hayes, handed her a coffee and said, "They are attempting to edit you out of your own source code, Isabel. The summit is in 1 hour. Remind them who the original developer is." She let his words settle in the quiet room. The grief for the life she'd had would have to be cataloged later, a private list of structural failures she would need to address on her own. Then she opened the portfolio. Inside were 3 things: a handwritten letter from Ashworth on his personal stationery, a thick sheaf of legal documents, and a smaller sealed envelope bearing her children's names with the inscription, "For their foundations." The legal assessment confirmed what his partners had known for years. Every proprietary algorithm, every innovative data scaling solution, every user-centric design principle. The entire investment philosophy of Thorn Ventures, with a portfolio of startups now valued at over $500 million, was the vision of one person. Isabel Thorn, its architect, its future, the woman who had only ever wanted to build something that would last. Isabel read the alert confirming the final data wipe a second time. Then she set her phone down, walked to the window of her lawyer's office, and watched the gray light of Boston awaken, the bustling streets below completely unaware of the life that was about to be dismantled. She did not call her husband's family, Not immediately. She had a company to protect, and in that quiet moment, she began coding a counter-strategy that no one in Boston could ever anticipate. Isabel remained in that office for 1 week. She accepted the reality of the betrayal with cold grace, fielding calls from board members and investors who wanted to congratulate the woman who was redefining the tech landscape. She reviewed every recovered file from the corrupted drive, sitting in the conference room, illuminated by the glow of her laptop. She war-gamed every legal outcome with her old mentor 4 times, from 4 different angles. She was methodical. She was not emotional. She absorbed the entirety of the company she had built over 15 years, and she allowed it to reinforce her own core programming. Secure, encrypted, and breach-proof, she only faltered once, the night after the discovery. Alone in her starkly modern hotel room, she clutched a small, 3D-printed prototype from her son's first invention and stared at a photo on her phone. Isabel at the launch of their first major software, beaming, holding a glass of champagne, while Julian stood beside her, smiling at the camera, with a look she now recognized as ownership, not partnership. Julian watched the streams of data on his monitor from his office on the 60th floor of the Harbor Tower, his eyes scanning the market analytics. It wasn't the pride of an innovator watching his creation grow, but the cold satisfaction of a collector admiring his assets. Isabel had once mistaken that drive for vision. Now she took a deep, steadying breath and for the first time truly became Isabel Thorne, the sole developer of her own future. But her new build was still in development. Before Isabel could deploy the new code, she had to survive a system crash. The initial attack came not with a shout, but from the sterile silence of an encrypted hard drive. She was in Boston, debugging the final beta for a new platform when she noticed a hidden partition on their home network drive. At 8 months pregnant, looking for old family photos for a presentation, she found it. A woman named Chloe, a brand strategist Julian had mentioned bringing on, had her own secure folder. It contained documents, not for a marketing campaign, but for a new family trust. A second subfolder held travel receipts showing Chloe with Julian at conferences, dated months ago. Isabel's breath caught in her throat. Then she saw the final file. A purchase agreement for a sprawling estate in the Hamptons, with an invoice for a custom-built nursery, scheduled for completion the following week. "I am so sorry you had to see that, Isabel," Julian's father said when he arrived, his voice a perfectly calibrated performance of regret. "But you chose to be at the summit in London. The children needed stability, and Chloe has been a godsend. We've all been struggling since your company became your only priority." The words were a denial of service attack, designed to crash her system and frame her as the absent executive from 3,000 miles away. Less than 12 hours later, a post on a major tech blog went live. Tech CEO Isabel Thorne prioritizes global expansion, leaving family adrift. Sources claim venture capitalist Julian Thorne is managing the home front, with guidance from a new strategic consultant. Isabel's phone began to vibrate constantly. Slack messages from her team, calls from Julian's parents, even emails from his partners, all asking if she was all right. Each notification, another exploit in her public firewall. Back in their Beacon Hill brownstone, Chloe had already started the reconfiguration. A cozy library nook Isabel had coded with smart lighting for the kids was gone, replaced with a cold, minimalist desk. The glow-in-the-dark star charts Isabel had programmed onto her son Noah's smart ceiling were gone, as was the digital gallery of their daughter Sophie's fencing medals in the kitchen. A decade of family history, told in pixels and code, had been wiped and overwritten with a coat of sterile, unforgiving white. One system reset had erased 10 years of a family's heart. Her daughter, Sophie, video called her that evening. Her 6-year-old face was a pixelated image of forced brightness. "Mommy, when is your project going to be done?" "Soon, my sweet girl. Very soon, I promise." There was a pause filled with digital noise. She deleted Noah's stars. Isabel's vision blurred. I took a screenshot of them first. It's saved on my tablet. A tiny, trembling breath traveled through the fiber optic cable. "Mommy, are you still connected?" "I'm here, baby. I'm always here for you." After the call, Isabel walked to the window overlooking the city she was being celebrated for helping innovate, and she felt utterly corrupted. It wasn't quiet sadness, not a few tears. It was a raw, silent exception error, trapped deep in her code. The kind where your whole system freezes and you press your forehead against the cold glass, searching for a single line of functioning code that still holds true while your entire world blue screens. 8 months pregnant, her greatest professional triumph happening on the other side of the ocean. Her children being taught that she was a legacy system. Her very life's work being systematically decommissioned by a woman who was living in her home. Sometimes the entire architecture fails at once. The betrayal, the shock, the crushing weight of it all find the same critical vulnerability. The most dangerous thing you can do in that moment is to try and patch a compromised system. So, you grieve. You let the server crash. You accept the data loss and the downtime. But you do not start planning the new network until the full system audit is complete. And the audit always completes. Isabel's audit completed at 3 a.m. in a silent, server-cooled room. She wiped her eyes, drank some lukewarm coffee, and used a secure line to call her oldest mentor, Evelyn. Evelyn wasn't just a mentor. She was the most feared intellectual property litigator on the East Coast. Isabel knew the worst of the system failure was not behind her. It was just beginning to cascade. Your name is on the patents for the 3 core algorithms his entire fund is built on, Isabel. Your machine learning framework is the proprietary asset his firm uses to sell itself to every investor. You could file an injunction that would freeze every asset he has by sunrise. You could gut his company and open source the code for public use. Evelyn, I just want my children. I know, but you have root access. Absolute root access. For the first time in days, Isabel felt a flicker of power return to her own network. She called Julian's father from Evelyn's office. The legal strategy was compiled. She now had a formidable lawyer, a secure cloud drive full of recovered data proving her foundational code, and the undeniable truth of being the creator behind the Thorn brand. She told Evelyn she was going home to get her kids. Evelyn squeezed her shoulder. "Go get your kids, Mama Bear. We'll schedule the complete decompiling of his entire portfolio for tomorrow morning." Her smart key for the brownstone's front door flashed with an access denied message. Of course it did. She had to use the old intercom, getting buzzed into her own home like a guest, 8 months pregnant and running on pure adrenaline, and she waited. Julian's father opened the door. Next to him stood his wife, looking severe and disappointed. And in the living room, Chloe was directing art installers, pointing at a wall with the casual dominance of someone who already controlled the network. Julian's lawyer presented her with a leather-bound portfolio. Inside was an emergency custody petition, arguing that Amelia's demanding career as an architect, compounded by the hormonal strain of pregnancy, rendered her a volatile and neglectful mother. It alleged her unannounced visit to the family home would inflict severe emotional trauma on the children. The motion was bolstered by a sworn statement from Julian's own mother, which artfully reframed Amelia's creative drive as a series of manic, unstable episodes. Amelia was legally forbidden from setting foot in her own penthouse. She was barred from seeing her own children. She was standing in the lobby she herself had designed, an award-winning space, clutching a court order that branded her a danger. As the bronze elevator doors slid shut, she glanced up at the vast three-story window of her apartment and saw her son Theo's face, small and pale, looking down. He placed his hand against the glass and formed a single, silent word. "Mommy." Amelia lifted her own hand, pressing her palm against the cool lobby air. Theo copied the gesture, his little hand flat on the inside of the tempered glass. A moment later, his grandmother's silhouette appeared behind him, and an automated privacy screen descended like a curtain, erasing him from her view. Amelia stepped into a waiting car and provided the name of a hotel on the Magnificent Mile. She remained in the back seat for 20 minutes after they arrived, unable to speak the next command. She dialed Claire, who picked up before the first ring finished. "Where are you? What is going on?" He filed an ex parte motion. "Claire, I'm blocked from seeing the children." The ensuing silence was dense and charged, a void filled with disciplined rage. When Claire spoke again, her voice was chillingly precise. "Amelia, I need you to say that again, verbatim, because my brain is currently flagging that statement as legally incomprehensible. I need your help. I'm already in the car. Do not leave your hotel room. Do not contact him. Do not even allow his name to crystallize in your thoughts. I'm bringing Chicago-style pizza and a plan to systematically dismantle his entire financial existence." Claire appeared in Amelia's suite 30 minutes later, armed with pizza boxes, a laptop, and an expression that could short-circuit a trading floor. She spread a fan of documents across the coffee table, handed Amelia a slice, and declared, "All right, here's the strategy. First, we carbo load. Then, we itemize every architectural design, every supplier discount, and every bit of social capital you generated that his hedge fund used to impress investors. Following that, we will construct a lawsuit so financially crippling he won't be able to afford the login fee for public Wi-Fi, let alone a defense team. Julian Croft is the primary target, because C stands for completely finished, which is what he will be when we file for sanctions over his perjured testimony. Also, I've despised him since that benefit in 2023, when he dismissed Frank Lloyd Wright's work as just a bunch of leaky roofs. Against all logic, Amelia felt a fragile laugh escape her. Claire's firm requested an emergency hearing, but the judicial calendar was swamped. The soonest they could get was in 2 weeks, 14 days, 336 hours since she had last read her children a bedtime story. Her daughter, Sophie, called her on a tablet from the back of a linen closet, her voice a hushed whisper. "Mommy, Theo keeps asking when you'll be back from your business trip. He's been carrying around your sketchbook, and Dad says I'm spending too much time on my drafting homework. I'm trying to be strong, but I don't know what to tell them. You don't have to do anything but be you, sweet girl. I am on top of this. I swear to you, I am coming home." He sold the photography collection, the one Grandpa Grant helped you curate. I saw the art handlers take it away. A heavy silence filled the space between them. "But I saved your first conceptual drawing for the museum, Mommy. I took a photo of it before she had your office repainted. I kept it for you. Every single detail." Amelia pressed the tablet to her chest, shutting her eyes and breathing through the sharp, sudden jolt of pain. "You must breathe the way you do when you are waiting for concrete to cure, steady, slow, and with unwavering focus. If you are ever in a fight for your own children, only one thing is structurally sound: evidence. Document it all. Every text message, every dinner reservation he bailed on, every photo on the family cloud server, every call that went to voicemail. Keep blueprints in 3 separate locations: on a personal hard drive, in a secure digital vault, and with your legal counsel. The family court system does not respond to emotion, regardless of how justified your fury is. Family court responds to proof. Your sole purpose is to become the person who has the most of it. The hearing convened 2 weeks later. Claire and her team took less than 30 minutes to deconstruct Julian's case. The judge examined Amelia's architectural project revenue, the glowing articles in design magazines, and the email history proving she was not only a devoted mother, but the principal architect of their family's wealth and stability. He threw out the emergency petition with a stern warning to Julian about wasting the court's resources with fabrications. A temporary custody order was issued in her favor. Amelia was given immediate, temporary care of the children. She drove directly to their condo on the Gold Coast. Her kids spotted her car pulling into the drive and burst through the front door before the engine was even off. Little Theo wrapped himself around her leg, hiding his face in her coat. Sophie grabbed her mother's arm, her small frame trembling, with quiet sobs. Alex, her eldest, attempted to look composed, but the moment Amelia opened her arms, he collapsed into her embrace and simply held on. Julian was ordered to vacate the property within 72 hours. That night, as she stood in her own kitchen, with her children finally back under her roof, Amelia permitted herself one brief thought. It's over. I have my kids. I have my family's heritage. I'll serve him the divorce papers, and this entire nightmare will be finished. But Amelia had no way of knowing that the true nightmare was still 48 hours away, and that it would start with her world turning to black on the cold marble floor. One second, she was looking over the blueprints for a new pediatric wing, and the next, she was sliding to the ground, her pen skittering across the tile as a quiet darkness took over. It was the total weight of the stress, the sleepless nights, and the meals she had forgotten to eat. 8 months of nurturing a new life while navigating a tempest of grief, betrayal, and a vicious legal battle, all without a single moment of rest. Alex dialed 911. He recited their address to the operator with a chilling self-possession, a level of composure no 15-year-old should ever have to learn. With his younger brother, Theo, on his hip and his other hand gripping their dog's collar, he said, "My mom is pregnant and she just collapsed. She is not waking up. You need to send an ambulance to our address right now." At the hospital, the doctors stabilized both Amelia and the baby, but their orders were absolute: complete and total bed rest for the rest of the pregnancy. No stress. No work. She was not to leave the bed without assistance from her friend Claire or a nurse. Not even 24 hours later, Julian's lawyer filed another emergency petition, claiming Amelia was medically incapacitated and emotionally unstable, and demanding that sole custody of the children be awarded to him effective immediately. The second attack came the following morning. A major financial news service published a stunning exclusive online. An anonymous source had confirmed Amelia's identity as the daughter and sole heir of the notoriously private real estate developer, the late Arthur Grant. The article did not frame this as a story of inheritance. It framed it as a story of massive deception. Hedge fund titan, blindsided by wife's secret, 10-figure property empire. In a single moment, the entire story was turned upside down. Amelia was no longer the betrayed pregnant wife. She was recast as the scheming heiress who had ensnared her brilliant husband. The comment sections online were a cesspool of misogyny and vitriol. Julian, prepped by his mistress and PR guru, Chloe, appeared on a widely watched financial news show, playing the role of the stunned, wounded husband with flawless execution. "I was completely in the dark," he stated, his voice thick with calculated disbelief. "She concealed the Grant organization, the true scale of it, from me throughout our entire marriage. It makes me reconsider everything. My only priority now is to protect my children from any more dishonesty. The third attack was deployed that afternoon. Alex was in his school's library when a classmate shoved a tablet in his face, showing him the article. The comments were displayed directly beneath the headline. Anonymous accounts called his mother a fraud, a liar, and a silver spoon sociopath who had played his father for a complete fool. Alex threw a punch. His suspension was instant. When Amelia reached him by phone from her hospital bed, his voice was empty. They're all saying you lied to Dad, that you're the villain. Everyone thinks it's true. Alex, you need to listen to me very carefully. Is it true? Did you lie? A long, heavy silence stretched over the phone line, connecting her sterile room to his. I never told your father the full net worth of Grandpa Arthur's company. That part is true, but I have never, not once, lied about who I am. I'm the same mother who taught you how to use a drafting compass last week and who reads to you every single night. Then why does everyone online think you're some kind of monster? Amelia had no response that a 15-year-old could ever be expected to understand. She disconnected the call and sank back into the hospital pillows, a hand resting on her stomach, where her son was quietly stirring. For the first time, she allowed a thought she had constantly pushed away to surface. Perhaps this was a battle she was destined to lose. This was the absolute bottom, not discovering the doctored invoices for the art gallery, not being barred from her own Fifth Avenue home, not the swarm of photographers after the preliminary hearing. This utter helplessness in a hospital room, her children caught in the crossfire, the tabloids painting her as the villain, and her own daughter starting to believe their stories. This is the point where most people would have shattered. Juliana Vance did not shatter, but she felt the first hairline fractures form. When the world decides you are the antagonist, when a story built on falsehoods becomes the public record, your first urge is to shout your side of the story. You have to resist that urge. Not yet. Public opinion is a flash flood. It rushes in with destructive force, and then it withdraws. A financial audit, however, is bedrock. You build your case on bedrock. Let the floodwaters rage. The truth has patience. It can afford to wait for the proper moment to be seen. Unable to move, Juliana started to plan, first from the hospital and later from the guest apartment in her friend Maya's Tribeca duplex overlooking the Hudson, where she would spend the last weeks of her pregnancy. She began directing her family's private wealth managers with the cool precision of a woman whose father had taught her that the most important discoveries are made in quiet, sterile rooms. Her team of forensic accountants built a complete map of Arthur's finances. They found he had been diverting funds from their joint philanthropic accounts for more than a year to finance Chloe's entire life, the security deposit on her Soho art gallery, the lease on her new luxury sedan, lavish trips to Art Basel in Miami, and an enormous investment in an emerging artist that Juliana had seen on a prospectus and foolishly believed was for a new museum acquisition. She was no longer simply gathering ammunition for a divorce negotiation. She was assembling the intelligence for a hostile takeover of her own future. A private security consultant confirmed Chloe now had full access to their Fifth Avenue penthouse, sleeping in Juliana's bed, using her private study, and, in the most infuriating twist, showing off a vintage Cartier necklace on her social media. It was a unique piece, commissioned by her grandfather, a priceless family heirloom he had given her before he passed, which Chloe had evidently found in a jewelry box and was now flaunting as if it were her own. The accountants uncovered a hidden ledger Arthur had labeled the Hudson Project. a detailed record of his affair with Chloe that stretched back over a year. One email, sent by Arthur, on the very day Juliana was in the hospital for a high-risk ultrasound, exposed the true calculus of his betrayal. 9 words. The dynasty is secure. Time for a new aesthetic. Her best friend Maya visited her every single day, committed to the singular goal of making Juliana smile. Maya was flicking through the financial data on Juliana's tablet. He funneled $500,000 into her art consultancy. For her. Juliana, I have seen this woman's feed. Her idea of curation is posting a selfie in front of a famous painting. This isn't just cheating, it's an offense to the entire art world. Maya, don't. I am just saying, if you are going to blow up your marriage, at least do it for someone with some actual taste. To her own surprise, Juliana let out a small laugh. But the single piece of information that transformed her sorrow into something cold, sharp, and resolute came from a video call with her own daughter. In the middle of their chat, her 6-year-old Sophie held up a new finger painting and cheerfully said she was learning to be a modern artist. Referring to Chloe as Mama Chloe, it was not a child's mistake or a moment of bewilderment. Arthur had been coaching her, deliberately, methodically, teaching his daughter to see her own mother as an outdated original in need of a modern update, all while she was pregnant with his son and fighting for the legacy they were supposed to build together. There is a type of anger that burns hotter than betrayal and cuts deeper than any grief. It is the specific fury of a mother who finds out that someone has tried to edit her out of her own child's story. It is the only motivation you will ever need, because once that fire is lit, it burns until the job is done. 3 weeks after that call, Juliana delivered a perfectly healthy baby boy. She named him Max. Her best friend Maya held her hand while a small, leather-bound first edition of an architectural treatise from her late father sat on the nightstand. She recovered, she focused, and 8 weeks after Max was born, she was ready. The Metropolitan Benefactors Gala was being held at the Museum of Modern Art, and for the first time in its history, the lead sponsor would be the Astor Preservation Trust, chaired by its new director, Juliana Astor Vance. The attendee list was a carefully selected group of 500 of the most powerful financiers, philanthropists, and cultural figures in New York City. Juliana made certain an invitation was sent to Arthur's hedge fund, with the primary sponsor's name listed simply as the Astor Trust. It was a name Arthur had glanced at on family tax filings for years and written off as some dusty, irrelevant charity, never once making the connection to the colossal real estate empire her family quietly commanded. Because Arthur was the kind of man who never bothered to read the prospectus on his own wife. Maya, fastening the clasp on Juliana's diamond earrings on the night of the gala, caught her friend's reflection in the mirror. You are about to enter a room and calmly let your husband know that your family's little trust could acquire his entire fund with its quarterly interest payments, all while his girlfriend is posing for photographers in the lobby. This is the most magnificent public takedown in the history of Manhattan, and I am savoring every single moment. Juliana calmly adjusted an earring. It's not a takedown, Maya. It's a rebalancing of the portfolio. Of course, and a hostile takeover is just a spirited negotiation. It just happens to come with better champagne. The main hall of the MoMA was a cathedral of minimalist design and staggering wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out onto the city, and the architects of New York society moved between priceless works of art, sipping vintage champagne. The air hummed with the quiet frequency of immense power and legacy. Arthur arrived with Chloe on his arm. He was the very picture of a Wall Street king, dressed in a $10,000 custom suit, projecting the absolute confidence of a man who believes he has beaten the system. He saw his fund's logo displayed on a digital screen and felt a spark of self-satisfaction. His senior partner offered a nod from across the grand hall. Chloe, looking sleek and ambitious by his side, was already surveying the room, her mind calculating the net worth and social standing of everyone within her sightline. Maya's allies from the world of city government were gathered near the bar, projecting the unique brand of confidence that comes from knowing the people who write the zoning laws. A longtime colleague of Juliana's late father stood by the entrance, watching the arrivals with an expression that suggested he would much prefer to be restoring a historic brownstone. The evening's master of ceremonies, a celebrated historian who had known the Astor family for decades, walked to the stage. He spoke with deep respect about civic duty, about the city's foundational families, and about the woman whose family's work had preserved the city's soul, a woman who believed the greatest legacy to leave her daughter was a fierce dedication to history. And then he announced, "It is my profound honor to introduce to you all the new director of the Astor Preservation Trust." The grand sculptural staircase at the hall's center was suddenly bathed in light. There stood Juliana in a gown of sapphire blue, its lines as clean and powerful as a skyscraper's silhouette. She was not merely wearing a dress, she was embodying a statement, and as she started her composed descent, a hush fell over the gala before, table by table, the entire room rose to its feet. The applause began with the city's elder statesman who knew what the Astor name meant, then grew until all 500 guests were standing. Hedge fund titans, real estate moguls, society patrons, and political insiders, the absolute center of New York's power structure, all felt a tectonic shift in the city's landscape, even if they had never heard her speak before. Arthur's glass of expensive scotch paused on its way to his lips. At a table near the stage, Chloe's meticulously crafted expression of bored sophistication began to flicker, then failed completely. Sensing the entire room's assets suddenly reprice, Arthur's partner clutched his own phone. The man just looked down at the floor and whispered, "That's her. Oh God, we are in so much trouble." Juliana arrived at the podium and looked over the crowd. She did not scan for Arthur's face. He was irrelevant data. For 10 minutes, she spoke about her grandfather, about legacy, and about the fundamental difference between building a fortune for oneself and preserving a history for everyone. She spoke about her foundational research, a model for mapping cellular decay, and a principle her father had taught her, one she'd kept on her monitor for 2 decades. The elegance of a system isn't in its interface, but in the integrity of its source code. She described a comprehensive research grant she had written years ago. She didn't say for what or what had happened to it. She just said, "My father had that proposal peer-reviewed and archived, and it has remained on my drive for the last 15 years. Just last quarter, that entire methodology was about to be abandoned by an investor who couldn't grasp its long-term potential. A bright young postdoc on my team pulled it from a server folder, marked for deletion because he understood what it was, even when the man holding the purse strings had forgotten." A profound hush fell over the packed auditorium. That is what our work is really about. It's not about the billion-dollar valuation. It's not about a flashy launch. It's about the foundational science our children will build upon because we showed them what is truly meant to endure. At the Innovators Summit dinner, Eleanor never once glanced at Julian's table. She didn't have to. The rumors had already rippled through the waterfront convention center, and every guest felt the significance of the void where his name should have been celebrated. After her keynote on genomic sequencing concluded and the thunderous applause finally died down, Julian navigated his way through a crowd of investors and engineers. He approached with the hesitant gait of a man who just watched a critical piece of data corrupt before his eyes, unsure whether to attempt a system restore or just demand access back. He said her name. She turned, and immediately, two people stepped to her side, their movements so synchronized, it was obvious they had been anticipating this very moment, ready for a conflict Julian was utterly unprepared for. Mr. Sterling, a man whose tailored suit and quiet intensity projected the authority of a law firm that had managed Silicon Valley's fortunes for decades, handed him a slim leather portfolio. Julian took it. It contained 4 documents. The first was a petition for the dissolution of their marriage, filed with digital precision. The second was an emergency protective order, citing severe emotional distress to an expectant mother, already signed and time-stamped by a superior court judge. The third was a forensic accountant's report, meticulously detailing how venture capital funds, shared marital assets, had been used to charter private jets for his junior analyst. The fourth was a copy of their prenuptial agreement, with the professional malfeasance clause highlighted, which instantly and completely nullified his claim to any assets managed by the Vance family endowment, including their Pacific Heights mansion. That clause had been a firm condition from her father, who, after a single board meeting with Julian, determined that his daughter's future would be built on encrypted security, not on a handshake. Eleanor had never seen a reason to mention it. Not until now, Julian had 14 days to vacate the premises. Nestled behind the legal documents was a single stiff card. It was an official communication from his firm's board of directors, suspending his managing partnership indefinitely, pending a full audit. A handwritten note from Mr. Sterling was attached. The Vance family has been a client of our firm since 1982. We are confident this can be settled without the direct intervention of the Vance estate. Julian just stood there, paralyzed in his $2,000 suit amid the hum of the summit, clutching 4 pages that had just liquidated his entire existence. Eleanor looked at him, not with anger or satisfaction or even sorrow, though that quiet grief was a complex algorithm she would have to run privately for years to come. She looked at him the way a lead engineer regards a server that has suffered a catastrophic, unrecoverable failure. It was a cool, objective, and final assessment. She then turned and walked away, her legal counsel moving with her like a silent, protective firewall. The ambient noise of the summit swelled around them, and Julian finally understood the architecture of his wife's quiet strength. This wasn't a glitch. This was a flawlessly executed protocol. This was the termination sequence, and a termination sequence is merely the logical conclusion of the commands that preceded it. Julian lost the mansion. He burned through 10 of his 14 days, consulting with lawyers who all told him the Vance endowment was a cryptographic fortress. He tried to call his mistress, but her number now went to a voicemail for a very new, very aggressive legal team. He called his own father, who offered nothing but hollow platitudes. He wound up in a generic corporate apartment in Soma that felt like a pop-up ad because he had only ever known how to acquire assets, not how to build a life. Julian had only ever managed portfolios that other people had built into something meaningful. And with Eleanor gone, he discovered the value of his own reputation was a mere rounding error compared to the legacy he had leveraged from hers. The analyst's departure was swift and logical. With no more access to the mansion, no more invitations to exclusive tech summits, and no more leverage from the Vance name, she simply moved on. People like her don't hold on to assets that are projected to decline. The truth had emerged on a quiet afternoon in her home lab. While reviewing cloud computing invoices for their joint ventures, Eleanor's eye for patterns noticed an anomaly. exorbitant server charges, billed for a defunct side project. He claimed he was winding down. A quick check of the access logs showed the server activity was coming from IP addresses that matched hotel receipts for trips he had taken with his mistress. His affair wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was a series of badly concealed financial transactions. From his office across the bay, Julian's partner, David, read the board's suspension notice and just shook his head. He muttered to the empty conference room, "So that's where last quarter's burn rate went." Eleanor's mother, Diana, sent a panicked multi-paragraph email full of social ultimatums. It was all about the Vance family's reputation, their position in the tech community, and the absolute need to prevent a public relations disaster. Eleanor read it once. Then she forwarded it to Mr. Sterling with a single line, "For the archive." She never wrote back to her mother. David sent a text, saw the forensic report, knew the numbers felt wrong, should have flagged it. My failure. Eleanor read his admission, processed it, then set her phone aside. She didn't respond, but she also didn't block his number. Eleanor was a scientist, trained in finding solutions and resolving errors, not in maintaining unstable variables of resentment. But the most significant data point was found in an old leather briefcase in her father's study. Tucked into an inner pocket, beside his original patent filings, was a letter from him written 2 years before he passed away. In it, her father explained that he'd had Julian discreetly vetted after their engagement was announced. The investigator's report had mentioned the analyst's name a full year before Julian had even put a ring on her finger. Her father had known from the beginning. He chose not to intervene. His letter detailed his logic. My dearest Eleanor, you have a gift for seeing the underlying pattern. You have the right to detect an error in your own code and decide for yourself when to run a diagnostic. I would never deny you that discovery, but I will always make sure you have a secure server to reboot to. The endowment, the prenup, the law firm on retainer, it was all his contingency plan. It was her father's final piece of brilliant code, a genius programmer's loving note to the daughter he knew was his greatest innovation. Eleanor read it once, folded it with care, and returned it to the briefcase. She sat in the silence that followed, a stillness that felt like a system finally coming to rest. A year later, on a bright autumn morning, the kind of day in Napa Valley that feels like a reward for surviving the summer heat, Eleanor stands by the large window in the sunlit study of her family's Napa estate, gazing out at the golden vineyards. The home had been thoughtfully, meticulously updated. Her father's collection of first edition science texts was back on the shelves. Family photo albums were open on the coffee table, filled with pictures her brother had digitized, and in a sleek new frame, there was a photo of her infant son. Her son Theo's colorful STEM toys are arranged on a soft blanket nearby. New research papers are spread across the desk. She has converted the adjoining guest house into her private laboratory. Eleanor finishes a video call with her new board of directors in London. She is confident, clear, and decisive. She exudes the deep calm of a woman who didn't just recover her life, but re-engineered it from the ground up. She closes her laptop and stretches, inhaling a long, peaceful breath. Her son, Theo, babbles from his playmat, reaching for a hanging mobile of planets. He holds up a small building block to her, his face a mask of serious focus, as if presenting a newly discovered element. Eleanor looks at the block, then at her son's small, focused face, and a laugh escapes from deep within her. Not a reserved, polite sound, but a full, melodic expression of joy. It was the sound of someone who had finally stopped running someone else's program and had started writing her own. Her brother walks in a moment later with 2 mugs of coffee and gently tickles Theo, showing him how to stack the blocks, already teaching him the logic of family. Eleanor smiles, watching them, an expression of complete equilibrium on her face. Her brother asks softly, "You good, Ellie?" Eleanor looks at him, her constant, the man who had quietly cloned all her research drives before the separation and had managed her move out of the city without a single question. "I'm more than good, Leo. I'm finally home." And in her soul, she knew that was the most elegant solution she had ever found. She didn't raise her voice. She never fought over the fixtures in the Chicago riverfront condo. She refused to perform for the approval of a man whose celebrity chef status was a fiction, built on her father's blueprints and his own hollow charm. She simply sketched, and when the settlement was finalized, she rolled up the vellum draft with a crisp, clean snap, the same sound it made every night she finished a design, with Leo's quiet breathing drifting from his bedroom down the hall. Clara stared absently at the glittering lights of the Chicago skyline from her new apartment. Her mother, Meredith, found her in the study, where a laptop lay open on the desk, its screen still displaying the reservation logs for a private table that had demolished her marriage. "I was holding on to this until after the baby was born," Meredith said gently, her voice a steadying presence in the wreckage. "But I think your father would insist you have it now." She placed a heavy, leather-bound portfolio on the drafting table. It was her father's personal collection of unbuilt projects, filled with his notes on structure, integrity, and a single sealed envelope addressed to his daughter. A small embossed card slipped from between the pages, bearing the words, "For the one who always saw the foundation." With a shaking hand, Clara read the final passage of her father's letter aloud. The only part we hear is, "You must look after your mother. Not for any lack of strength. Her spirit is more sound than any steel beam, but because even the most enduring structures deserve to be sheltered, not endlessly tested by the storm." Leo gently set the worn blueprint on his nightstand and looked at his mother, a new understanding in his gaze. He gave a single, firm nod, the kind of nod a boy makes when he has just decided who he is going to be. Clara smoothed the hair from his brow, dimmed the lights, and let her thoughts turn to the shores of Lake Michigan, to a piece of land that was finally and completely hers to build upon. If this story resonated with you, we hope you'll consider subscribing. And we need to hear from you in the comments. At what exact moment did you guess that Julian's entire restaurant empire was just a house of cards? We are so thrilled to bring you the next chapter. As a final thought, this narrative was thoughtfully conceived, scripted, and created by our team to deliver a story with authentic heart and a meaningful conclusion. Every character, location, and conversation was constructed to entertain, inspire, and act as a reminder that your true value is never determined by someone who is incapable of recognizing it.